Keith, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. That's great.
So, a lot of us are thinking, those of us, especially who live in the state of California, think, "Wow, all right, finally something is being done about homelessness. They're going to clean up the streets." I think everybody's kind of sick of it. But you're saying that no, they're actually not solving the problem; that they're actually just pushing the problem around. So let's dive into what the problem is. How do we solve what they're doing now, why that's causing more problems, and also how we can actually solve this problem. So let's start off with what they're doing now and how that's not actually a solution. It looks like a solution, right? I mean, it looks like it to the rest of it. We're thinking, all right, they're cleaning up the encampments, but you're saying it's not a solution. What's happening? Why isn't it a
Yeah,
solution?
yeah. So what they're actually making the situation for ending homelessness in California worse by this program, because what they're doing is they're taking people's belongings and throwing them away. So then those people have to go out and get new pup tents, new sleeping bags, new clothing, new medicine. They're losing their IDs and everything. So then they're on this treadmill of trying to recover from each sweep. And the other thing is there's no place for people to go. So like when I've been talking to people in Santa Cruz this week, after this huge sweep they did in the what they call the Pogonip, this forested area everyone was forced into by the last couple of sweeps, they don't have anything anymore, and they're wandering around like trying to find a place to be, and there basically is no place for these people to be. And then they claim they're going to put some people into shelters. Not one person from the last sweep took them up in that offer, but also right before that sweep, they evicted all the number of homeless people out of the shelters to make room for the people they were sweeping, so they could say they placed people in a shelter. And this has gone on for years and years and years, and it's not a solution. Because imagine you lost all your belongings, and now you got to go get more belongings, and you can't rest anywhere. You can't. The police then move you to another location once you get new belongings, and you just keep moving around. It's called whack-a-mole. It doesn't solve any problems. And the state of California has already spent $24 billion since 2019 on solving homelessness.
What did
And
they do with that $24 billion dollars in the last 5 years?
yeah, it's 160,000 dollars per homeless person if you take the numbers of homeless people that they claim
Right.
are living outside, and which is a way undercount. The numbers are much larger than what the point in time count is, which is used to get funding from the Housing and Urban
Right.
Development.
But what
So
did they do with the 20? Have they done anything? Did they waste the 26 billion? Is it spent? Is it still sitting in an account? They haven't done anything with it. Like, what's gone on with that money?
it seems that this is typically what happens, and it's because of the way both federal and state laws are created. So what you're not allowed to give the money directly to helping a homeless person, because you need to, because then maybe the homeless person will rip off the taxpayer, right? So that's the problem. So then what happens is that the money goes to administrative costs. So
Okay.
they hire some case managers. They pay the rent for the facilities. They pay their insurance, their copy machines, papers like that. But they're not really allowed to use it for actually resolving the homeless problem. So, for
What do
instance,
you
in
mean?
Santa,
So I understand. Let me just, so I
uh-huh.
understand and I agree with not cutting checks and giving that to each individual homeless person. Like, here's some money, here's 100 grand, go make your life better. I don't think that's a solution.
Yeah,
But
no
what do
one's
you
thinking
mean?
that.
Right. So what are you saying? So what that 160, let's say it's 100 grand because there's more, or let's say even it's even 50 grand because there's more homeless people out there. Are you saying that they're not able to use that money towards, I mean, shelter, food, services, towards getting them cleaned up, getting them helping with job services? Like what's the issue?
Okay, so what? So, for instance, when we had Housing for Health, which came to Santa Cruz, they got $2 million to start the program. So I talked to the director, and he says, "Well, yeah, we have this money, but we don't have money to actually buy like hotel." This is right at the beginning of COVID, so we don't have the money to buy uh, hotels to put people in. We can't use the money to as rent subsidies, so there is like a possibility of some rent subsidies to keep people from being homeless. It
Right.
can't be used for that. Basically, it has to be used for just the administration. So, for example,
What?
they just gave what's called a encampment resolution grant to the city of Santa Cruz, and that was in April. It's $4 million, and it was being used to basically sweep a couple of homeless camps around the homeless shelter, and they were going to, for 2 years, make sure no homeless people lived outside the homeless shelter or in the park near the homeless shelter. That was the goal. They were going to ultimately house 33 people out of that $4 million and build another roughly 25 tiny homes that would be placed inside the shelter parking lot, basically. So that's what that $4 million was done. We then received another $14 million a year ago for the city, and what they did was they cleared out one camp of about 400 people. Those people then moved to the area outside the shelter, and then now they're being moved again. And that was the 1 million. So it cost them roughly $250,000 per suite to get rid of the people living outside. And then they also have another program, which is to ticket homeless people in cars and tow their cars and junk them, which then moves those people into tents, which then moves them
Right.
into the street. So the thing that we proposed in 1988 here in Santa Cruz was that the city plan ahead for an increase in homelessness, which was be very, very likely. This is 1988. And we're suggesting maybe build some single room occupancy hotels, um, ex, expand addiction treatment facilities so that people that want it, which I have this question all the time. People come to me, I'm so sick of being on whatever the drug is. Is there any way you can get me into Janus or someplace? And you can't. There's no space available unless you've got a lot of money to go to a recovery location or you know, get addiction services. So you don't get that. Um, and then, so all these things that could have happened. The other thing that's the most important thing is when I started Food Not Bombs in 1980, there were virtually no homeless people. I went to the one shelter, gave a speech. The guys came to eat, and they said, "There's no food for homeless people in Boston. Wouldn't you do this every day?" So we just quit our jobs and just did it every day because we were like astounded. But it was like about 30, 40 homeless people. Now Boston has got like a massive crisis of homelessness. So what happened from 88 to now? Wages stayed stagnant, and costs of housing increased. Now, I've been homeless 5 times, I believe, maybe 6 times. Every one of them was for a medical emergency. I don't use drugs. I don't drink at all. I have like essentially a master's degree, and yet I found it impossible to not save my housing when I got ill, and then lost my job for being ill, and then trying to find housing while being ill. Um, it's really, really difficult. So we make all these barriers to getting off the streets. The other thing that happens by what this you know resolution, executive order, and the Grants Pass versus um, Johnson ruling in the Supreme Court is that it criminalizes people for living outside. So just recently, I was in front of the homeless shelter talking to a man who had knew he was going to lose his housing, so he bought an RV. And I've met a lot of people that go through this transition. They bought the RV, but then it's illegal to park outside at night in an RV in Santa Cruz, and he did not know that. So then he had his RV towed. So then he moved to a tent outside the homeless shelter with his wife, and the police came and they gave him 7 tickets over the course of a week. They gave his wife 7 tickets for living in the same tent. So now that family has 14 tickets, which will then go to collection, and then they will, if when they get a full-time job or a job, wages will be garnished from the collection agency, making it even more difficult to get housing, and their FICO score will be bad. In Santa Cruz, it's a misdemeanor if you get 2 tickets for living outside. So then you have a misdemeanor. The last time I was homeless in Santa Cruz, I was denied apartments because I had a misdemeanor conviction for a political protest I had done, and they just used that as the way to just say, yeah, you can't get um, housing. And I have a really good FICO score, so even with that and being able to pay 2 months rent, and I just couldn't do it. I just it was
Yeah.
not possible. So I had to get kind of Fortunately, a friend let me rent her couch basically. So that's how I got off the streets in that case. But this is it's one of the apartments I looked at here in Santa Cruz was $800 for the top bunk in a room with 2 other college students. And here,
Wow.
like 65 years old, you're going to be living in a top bunk in a room with 2 college students. I mean, very nice college students, but that's really for Americans to have to go that way. And then the other
Right.
thing is that right now you have 78% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. Many of those people, if there's any kind of economic problem, they're just going to end up on the streets. And the hunger hotline that I answer, which is a toll free number that I was gifted in '94, I'm now getting between 10 to 20 phone calls a day from seniors who have no food, who were referred to us by United Health or Red Cross, thinking we have home delivery of food. And the stories I hear from these yet to be homeless Americans, these seniors, it's just heartbreaking. And in some cases, they are already homeless, but living in a vehicle and feel like they have, maybe we could bring them food to their vehicle. Often it's in rural America. So the, that's another whole homeless problem that's not really discussed in the United States, is how many homeless people live in rural America, that you just don't see them in tent cities. And, there's like thousands and thousands of people that don't get counted, that just live in forests, or in, sides of railways and so on all over America. It's just huge. And that problem could have been alleviated back when Reagan was elected, and instead of the policies that he did as a president, where he defunded public housing, and that was also the fact that they didn't fund the maintenance of public housing, meant that they became like run down. So people kind of like, well, yeah, bulldoze them, like Cabrini Green in Chicago. It was like a mess. So so you could see popular support for getting rid of public housing, but they didn't replace it with actually livable public housing that those people could have moved into. Then they also became all these federal laws, like for instance, you can't you have in public housing, often if your husband had a criminal situation, then they couldn't be at public housing with you. So that destroyed families and so on. And that way made it, so all these policies are not thought out from the point of view of what it's like to be a poor American trying to struggle. They're thought out from very wealthy people who have a caricature of what homeless people are. That's a big problem. And then the other big problem, and I think this is probably the core to solving this crisis, is to see homeless people as people. And that's one of the things that's so disturbing. When I heard at the beginning of the genocide in Gaza, the leaders of Israel calling them human animals. Well, if you're on nextdoor.com in America, the homeless are called human animals. So therefore, this dehumanization makes it possible to not implement projects that would help homeless people. Another thing, for instance, often a low-income housing project will be proposed, and they will say, well, we're going to put homeless people into this low-income housing project. Then the neighbors all organize to push back, saying, we don't want homeless people living in a house near us. But the thing is, they're no longer homeless when they're living in the apartment. They're now housed. So they are not homeless people living next to you. But we have to
Right.
overcome this whole like stigma that the
Yeah.
homeless are. There are neighbors, there are family members. We've all had, I mean, many of us have had family members that are homeless. My brother was homeless with his wife for 25 years. that's the nature of being a working class person in America. You're likely, unfortunately, to have periods of homelessness.
Why didn't you take your brother in?
Oh, well, I myself was marginal as it was, and so the best I could do was to help him. I would pay his hotel bill for a little bit. Um, Also, he had mental health problems, but the biggest thing is he wanted his own independence. He wanted to
Mhm.
be, and this is the other thing, the dignity of people living outside. So why is the moving into shelters a failed system? Um, One, because it's sort of like the shelters here. The nickname for them is concentration camp. And even though you're free to get on their van and come to town 2 or 3 times a day, you're limited to that. You're not allowed to walk to town or ride your bike to town, because you don't want homeless people passing house people, because that's the
Mhm.
policy in our community, and that's frequently the policy. And
Yeah.
therefore, so that's so people want to have their dignity. They don't want to be treated like children. And you can't have a relative like in your house for, I just had a person living in there's a couple of us living, a homeless person living in the apartment that I'm also kind of, I'm not owning either, and I'm living in.
Yeah.
And so the poor person that owns the property, had to put up with two of us, and that was her relative. And eventually we had to, she's a licensed medical social worker, and she spent 12 months trying to get her ex-husband into housing, and has still failed. And if you have a professional, one social worker who's dedicated to you getting housing, and you can't get housing because of the way the system is, imagine all the people that don't have a former
Right.
spouse who was a professional in this area trying to get housing. It's just
Yeah.
impossible. All the system is organized in a way to maintain homelessness and encourage more people to be homeless.
Hey guys, this was just a clip of a longer show. Catch the full show by going to KimIversonShow.com. It is free. It airs Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. You could go back now and watch this full interview. I highly recommend it. Again, go to KimIversonShow.com. Thank you so much for watching.